On a cold morning in 1838, soldiers walked into Cherokee homes in these mountains and gave the families minutes to leave. Minutes. People left food on the table and the door standing open. What followed was a forced march of 1,000 miles that killed thousands before it was over. They call it the Trail of Tears. That's one story about the Cherokee and the Great Smoky Mountains. It's true, it's documented down to the dates, and it's the heaviest thing that ever happened in this part of the country. But it's not the story the internet wants to tell you. The story going around now is about tunnels. It says that a few years before the soldiers came, as government surveyors and prospectors pushed into the Smokies, the Cherokee elders went silent and sealed the entrances to a vast network of ancient shafts threaded beneath the peaks. Capped them by night. Hid them so completely that whatever was down there is still down there, waiting, and the people who knew the locations carried the secret to their graves. Two stories about the same mountains. One you can check down to the day it happened. The other can't be checked at all. And that, right there, is the first clue. Look at the shape of the tunnel story. The shafts are ancient, so no one can date them. The locations were never revealed, so there's nothing to find. They were capped in the dark, so there's nothing left to see. Every door the story opens, it locks behind itself. That's not how real history behaves. It's how a story is built when it's designed to never be proven wrong. And when you trace this one back, it doesn't lead to a survey journal or a line in the records. It leads mostly to a single video. The real documented history wrapped around it is just there to make it smell true. So here's what we're doing tonight. We're going to take the tunnel story apart piece by piece. And then we're going to find the real thing buried underneath it. Because the Cherokee absolutely did keep secrets from the men who came to take their land. And there really is a Cherokee tradition of people going into the mountains to escape what was coming. It's just not a conspiracy about mine shafts. It's something far stranger and far harder to forget. And once you see why the tunnel story exists at all, you won't be able to unsee what it's covering up. If you'd rather have the real history than the algorithm's version of it, subscribe now. What actually happened in 1835 is heavier than any tunnel. To understand what the Cherokee were protecting, you have to start with what was being done to them. And in 1835, what was being done to them had a name, a date, and a signature most of the Cherokee Nation never agreed to. By the 1830s, the Cherokee Nation was not a scattering of villages waiting to be surveyed. It was a constitutional republic with a capital, a written language, a newspaper, a court system, and a principal chief named John Ross, who had taken the fight against removal all the way to the Supreme Court and, on paper, won. It didn't matter. The state of Georgia wanted the land. Gold had been found in the southern Appalachians, and the federal government, under Andrew Jackson, had already decided which way this would go. What it needed was a piece of paper. On December 29, 1835, in the Cherokee capital of New Echota, that paper was signed. The Treaty of New Echota traded away everything, all Cherokee land east of the Mississippi, ceded to the United States, in exchange for $5 million and territory in the West. By its terms, the entire homeland was to be surrendered, and the people moved within 2 years. Here's the detail that makes it a wound, and not just a transaction. The men who signed it had no authority to. They were a small faction, remembered as the Treaty Party. Major Ridge, his son John Ridge, the newspaper editor Elias Boudinot, and a handful of others who had concluded that removal was now inevitable and that a treaty was the only way to soften it. Principal Chief John Ross did not sign. The Cherokee National Council did not approve it. The great majority of the nation rejected it outright and sent protests insisting the document was a fraud. The United States Senate ratified it anyway in the spring of 1836 by a single vote. So the legal instrument that erased the Cherokee homeland was signed by people most Cherokee considered to have no right to sign it. And it carried a death sentence inside it. When the 2-year deadline came, and most of the nation had refused to move, still in their homes, still farming, still waiting for the justice the courts had promised, the army came. In 1838, General Winfield Scott's troops rounded the Cherokee into stockades and drove them west. Thousands died on the way. The Cherokee remember it as the Trail of Tears. Now hold that beside the legend. The story wants the great secret of 1835 to be a hidden tunnel system. But the great secret of 1835 wasn't underground. It was the open, documented swindle of an entire nation by way of a treaty it never agreed to. That's the thing the period is actually hiding in plain sight, not because anyone capped it at night, but because it's easier to chase a mine shaft than to sit with what was really done. And yet the legend isn't pulled out of nothing. There genuinely were things in those mountains that outsiders hungered for, and that the Cherokee had every reason to keep close. To see how the real guarding of real resources got twisted into a tunnel conspiracy, you have to follow the prospectors underground, into caves that were being mined long before 1835. Strip the legend down, and there's a grain of something true at the center of it. The mountains held wealth. Outsiders wanted it. And access was worth controlling. It just wasn't a network of ancient capped shafts. It was, among other things, saltpeter. Saltpeter, potassium nitrate, is the essential ingredient in gunpowder, and the limestone caves of the southern Appalachians are full of the nitrate-rich earth it's leached from. Long before and after 1835, people dug that earth out of mountain caves, ran water through it, and boiled the runoff down to make the raw material of ammunition. It was real industry, scattered through the same ridges the Cherokee called home, and it spiked in value every time the country went to war. Caves, in other words, genuinely were mined in these mountains, genuinely were fought over, genuinely were worth keeping strangers away from. Add to that the gold strikes that had helped light the fuse of removal in the first place, and the timber, and the simple fact that surveyors arriving to draw boundary lines were the advance scouts of dispossession. The Cherokee had every reason on earth to be guarded about what the mountains held and where. Telling a federal commissioner where the valuable ground was meant handing him the map to your own eviction. So picture how a real thing becomes a fake one. Start with documented cave mining and coveted mountain resources. Add a people who really did refuse to volunteer information to the men surveying their land. Add the genuine existence of caves, sinkholes, and old dugout saltpeter workings dotted through the hills. Stir in a century and a half of retelling. Strip away every caveat, and you arrive at vast, ancient tunnel networks the Cherokee sealed by night to protect a lost civilization. Each step feels small. The destination is pure invention. The tunnels that actually exist under the Smokies make the point almost too neatly. The most famous secret tunnel in the park is a stone-lined underpass beneath the road near Kuwohi, the peak long labelled Clingmans Dome. And it was built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps, so hikers and mules could cross safely. Others are the dug-in hideaways of Prohibition-era moonshiners. And one widely shared tale of an underground Cherokee city beneath Cades Cove turns out to be a tourism blog's April Fool's joke, which the blog itself cheerfully admits at the bottom of the page. That's the raw material the legend quietly upgrades into antiquity. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting. More interesting than the fake. Because the Cherokee really did carry knowledge they would not surrender to outsiders. And that knowledge really did involve the inside of the mountains. It just wasn't engineering. It was a map of the spirit world, and the men who came to record it almost missed it entirely. In the late 1880s, a young ethnographer from the Bureau of American Ethnology named James Mooney came to live among the eastern Cherokee in the mountains of western North Carolina. He spent years there. He learned the language, sat with the medicine men and storytellers, figures like the one remembered as Swimmer, and wrote down what they were willing to share. The result, Myths of the Cherokee, is still one of the deepest records we have of how the Cherokee understood their own homeland. And in Mooney's pages, the mountains are not empty rock, they are inhabited. Beneath the high peaks, the Cherokee said, live the Nunnehi. The name is usually translated as the people who live anywhere, or the immortals. They are not ghosts and not gods. They are a separate people, fully alive, who keep townhouses under the mountains, under the mounds, beneath the rivers and the grassy balds where no timber grows. Hunters told of hearing drums and dancing high on a ridge, following the sound through laurel and mist, and finding nothing. The music always shifting to somewhere just behind them. The Nunnehi were said to be good neighbors. They took in lost travelers, fed them in their hidden townhouses, healed the sick, and guided people home. And in times of war, the stories say, they came out of the mountains to fight beside the Cherokee. So when the legend insists that the Cherokee held secret knowledge of a hidden people living underground in the Smokies, it isn't inventing that from scratch. It's taking something real, a profound central strand of Cherokee belief, and flattening it into a conspiracy about excavated tunnels. The underground people are real in the tradition. They're spirit folk, not miners, and the elders' reluctance to hand that sacred geography to outside surveyors and collectors wasn't the concealment of a vault, it was the protection of the holy. Then there's the part of Mooney's record that will stop you cold, because it sits exactly where the legend wants to be, and says something the legend never could. Mooney recorded a tradition called the Removed Townhouses. Long before the Trail of Tears, the story goes, the people of certain towns began to hear invisible voices, the Nunnehi, warning of coming war and grief, and inviting them to come and live under the mountains and the waters, where they would be safe forever. In one town the people agreed. They were told to fast and keep silent for 7 days. On the 7th day, a sound came from the hills, growing until it rolled like thunder, and the mountain opened, and the town was taken inside. In the versions tied most closely to the removal, the meaning is unmistakable. The Nunnehi come to a village on the eve of catastrophe and offer escape into the mountain itself. Some families follow them into the rock and are never seen again. Others refuse, stay above ground, and are swept up and driven west on the Trail of Tears. The people who went into the mountain escaped what was done to those who stayed. Read that again with 1838 in mind. This is a people facing annihilation, telling a story in which the only way to survive is for the mountain to open and take you in. It is grief and defiance turned into sacred narrative. It is, in the most real sense available to human beings, a story about going underground to escape removal. That's what the legend is groping toward, and completely fails to grasp. Which raises the last question, the one that finally explains why the fake exists at all. Lay the two stories side by side, and the difference is everything. The legend says, the Cherokee hid physical tunnels, capped them by night, and guarded a vault of ancient secrets that you, the viewer, are now being let in on. The truth says, the Cherokee guarded a sacred understanding of a living mountain world and told a story in which the mountain opened to save the people the United States was about to destroy. Notice what the fake quietly does. It takes the agency away from the catastrophe and hands it to a mystery. If the real story of 1835 is a stolen homeland and a fraudulent treaty and a forced march that killed thousands, that's a story with villains who have names and a government that has a paper trail. It implicates people. It demands you sit with something heavy. But if the real story is secret, ancient tunnels and a hidden civilization, then the Cherokee becomes set dressing in someone else's adventure. The pain gets swapped for a puzzle, and the whole thing turns into entertainment with the suffering filed off. And the capped-by-night detail does the same work the dynamite does in every other version of these stories. It explains why you can't check. The shafts are sealed, so there's nothing to excavate. The locations were never written down, so there's nothing to map. The disappearance of the evidence isn't a flaw in the tale. It's the engine that lets the tale run forever without ever being tested. Set against that, look at how the real knowledge survived. It wasn't sealed in the dark. It was spoken, carried by storytellers across generations, given carefully and on the Cherokee's own terms, to a man who spent years earning the right to write it down. The Nunnehi stories are still told today. The Removed Townhouses tradition is still in print, still studied, still alive. The truth didn't need to be hidden underground to endure. It needed people willing to keep telling it, and it had them. So here is the honest answer to the question the title asks. What did the Cherokee tell the men drawing lines through their country in 1835? As little as they could, because those men were the surveyors of their dispossession, and silence was a form of resistance. What were they protecting? Not a tunnel system, a homeland, a sacred map of living mountains, and the dignity of not handing either to the people taking everything else. And why does the legend reach for shafts capped in the dark? Because the dark is easier to look at than the daylight crime that actually happened here. Stand on a high bald in the Smokies at dusk, where the timber gives out and the wind comes up, and the old stories say a townhouse of the immortals lies somewhere under your feet. You don't need to invent a sealed vault to feel the weight of that ground. Real people loved these mountains, were lied out of them by a treaty they never signed, and were marched 1,000 miles to the west while telling one another that the mountain might yet open and take the faithful home. That's the secret of 1835. It was never capped. It was just easier to ignore. If this gave you the real story instead of the myth, send it to one person who deserves to know the difference. Just one. There's another buried history we're already chasing, a true one. I'll see you there.